Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Fridays with Keenan's Cutting Edge. My name is Jenna Labor, and I will be your host as we explore the dynamic world of Don Keenan's trial philosophy, The Cutting Edge. Those of you joining us live this afternoon have the opportunity to ask questions and interact with our speaker. Please do so, because it's so much more fun when you guys are involved. If you have a question, please type it into the comments section and we'll be sure to address it. Episodes are released each week following the live broadcast, so be sure to hit that subscribe button and click the alerts icon to make sure you don't miss an episode. Today, we have Adam Anderson with us to talk about power words. Since the 2022 list has not yet been finalized, Adam's going to talk about some power words from the past few years. Adam is KTI faculty for focus groups and rules, and he practices personal injury law out of Florida. You may remember him from Las Vegas, but as I just found out today, he's no longer in Las Vegas, he's in Florida. Also, however, represents folks in Nevada, Alabama, and California. We'll put his contact information in the description below so you can contact him directly after this episode if you have questions on the topic of power words. The words we use and the way we use them are extremely powerful. We see the manipulation of ideas through strategic word choice every day. Even though we may not always be actively attuned to how word choice affects us, subconsciously, words impact our decisions, our feelings, and our actions. Adam, share with us about KTI power words.
Thank you, Jenna. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and it's always a great opportunity to help other lawyers based upon the stuff that Mr. Keenan gives us. And, I had an intimate knowledge of sitting there with him for about 14 months. So I feel grateful to be here and talk to y'all. When you asked me to come on the show, about a month ago, I was really eager to say yes, sure, whatever. Mr. Keenan wants me to be on there. He wants me to talk. Sure, why not? But as the time drew near, just as well as I do, it's like, what am I going to talk about? Power words. I mean, they're power words. Use them. What's the issue? Why do people not understand why we need to use power words? It's just something as simple as he says, do it, you do it. He puts out a list every year, use them. But then I was reminded yesterday with Mr. Keenan, when I had a meeting with him, and he says, Adam, sometimes you just got to go back to the basics. Mm-hmm. You got to go back to where we first began and refresh yourself on the basics, because sometimes we just lose sight of where we were and what works in the rapid day-to-day, put the fires out and move the cases along. So like many things that he teaches, I tried to follow. So I set myself back yesterday afternoon. I slowed down and grabbed the first edge and went way back to the very first articles that he wrote back in 2010, 2011. And so I want to go back to the basics and start us there, and just remind us all of something that we do know, but we don't necessarily implement every single day. But before we get to power words, I think it's important that we talk about effective communication. And power words are just a tool for effective communication. In the way I practice and the way I understand it as a trial lawyer, our number one performance goal should be effective communication, whether that be to our client, whether that should be to the judge, whether that's to a jury. We've got to meet those folks where they're at. They all come to the table with certain preconceived notions or biases or expectations of what they want to hear or what they need to hear. And it's our job as advocates, I believe, and so I'm taught and told, and what I experience is that we got to go meet them where they're at. And that's even more true for today. As Americans, I think if you turn on any type of news station, it's, well, how is this going to affect us or affect me? How is this going to affect me right now? It's a me world that we live in. So we need to understand that and go to them, make friends, and take them where we want. And one way to do that is with power words. And one other thing with effective communication, it allows us to earn the trust and respect of the audience. And one way to do that is with our words. It allows us to educate and explain our client's story in a real effective way that may impact or allow the juror or the audience to relate with somebody else through their own experience. And I think, that's what we have to focus on. So what are power words? Power words are words that carry with themselves connotations or expectations. They carry emotion. They incite action. And they frame the perspective of the listener, of the audience. So I was thinking back, when was the first time I've ever even heard the power of words? And I don't know about you, Jenna, but it was like I was taught day in, day out as a child, watch your words, be careful what you say. They can leave an impact. We're all told the lie of, sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never hurt us. And that's just a bunch of bullshit. Flat out lie. I mean, there were many times in my life that I can remember I'd much rather have a broken arm than the things that were spoken to me. I don't know about you.
Absolutely.
So words carry that impact. Mother Teresa said, words can be short and easy to speak, but their echoes are truly endless. Then I was like, wow, that's sort of, profound. Short and simple words that carry echoes. And imagine the scenario of a kid and mom says, I love you. Love. We all know what love is. We've all hopefully experienced some sort of love in our life. And that brings a warm, joyous feeling to ourselves. But then you change one simple word there. And the mom says to the kid, I hate you. One word makes all the difference in the world. And it shapes the perspective of what you're now going to hear. Anything I say after I love you is going to take you down one road. If you start with I hate you, it goes down another road. Another word that, just is interesting that came to me, and I was sitting there going, how does this impact my cases, or, the general rear end collision cases that a lot of us handle? Because we don't all have catastrophic cases. We all got those, low impact, minor impact, soft tissue injury cases, whatever they want to call them. And essentially they're calling your client a liar. Why don't we just call a spade a spade? What happens when you say liar? I mean, that carries the connotation of, what is, let's a liar? That's something that's nasty. We don't like liars. And we can challenge the jury. We can challenge people by just, setting polarized scenarios there. Is, you can either believe this person or you can call them a liar. What is it? Biblical references talk about power words. Proverbs 18 says the tongue has the power of life and death. And I think these are all things that we need to, just remember that the words that we speak, grab the attention and set forth the meaning of where we're going. They even label. And, I was reminded by that. And, Trump, if you love him or hate him, his labels stick. And it shapes the perspective of which the information follows. Again, so it's these things are simply easily understood. They elicit that emotion, and they set forth the stage of which you can present information. And if you use words, you can go through these lists of words, and many, I sit there and go, oh, that's not going to feel right coming out my mouth. But it might feel right coming out your mouth. It might sound great for Mr. Keenan to say it, but I can't say that. And you have to choose words, either be on this list or other words that you find in life, that are authentic to you. And I have found that, that's a key in this thing is you've got to, in building the trust, using the words to elicit emotion out of the folks that you're talking to, setting the stage, then follow it with authenticity. And don't try to use words that are completely out of the ordinary for, your common vernacular. So, I guess to boil it down to its simplest terms, power words carry emotion, incite action, and frame the perspective of the listener. What is it? Luntz, the words that matter, I think is where Keenan originally cites him back in his 2011 article. Has used a lot of political jargon to frame references for the public eye. And one that I was just reading about and just preparing for this was economic growth versus a healthy economy. Economic growth, when you say economic growth, that's corporate bullshit. I can't necessarily get behind profits over people. And that's what economic growth essentially is, to a certain degree. But if you say healthy economy, well, everybody wants a healthy economy. That's safety, that's security that we can all agree upon. Now, there's arguments from either side of that, but it allows you the opportunity to argue behind a word or a phrase that incites that action or frames the perspective of the listener. So, and those analogies or examples just go on and on and on. So where do you find them, I guess, is the ultimate thing, because as lawyers, it's like, give me my stuff. I want to know. Just that's fine. I don't care how I use them. I need to use them. Give me where are they? First, we got to don't forget the valuable resource that Mr. Keenan gives us. We've got the Edge. We've got the Keenan Trial blog. He releases lists of power words every year, and generally it's at the year-end seminar. Used to be Costa Rica. Hopefully we can all get back to that. Hint, hint, Mr. King, get us back on Costa Rica or something. So you can use those, and you start there, and again, you use that. The blog, just watch the words that Mr. King uses every week. That you'll start to see trends. You'll start to see his research and development start to flow through. Be keen to that. Use those words in your focus groups. Ask the focus group. That's how I do it. If I learned anything, and if I have learned anything over the years, it's I don't have an opinion, and I really don't have an opinion. It's what is my listener's opinion, or ultimate audience going to be, and ask them in a focus group, well, how would you sum this up? What words would you use? What's the best way to say this? Is there a word that can encapsulate everything? Do you do that in your focus groups?
Absolutely. If you weren't convinced, what would have convinced you? What else did you need to know? Or how do I need to phrase this? What would make more sense to you? Clearly you're not picking up what I'm putting down. How do I do it better? And they do a good job of giving feedback.
And it makes our job so much easier. And
Yep.
Why not? Ask the folks what they want to hear and give it back to them. Mm-hmm. Or turn on the TV. Take a look at what the major advertisers, what are the commercials saying? They're using power words all day long. They're trying to entice people to buy product. And these are words that are going to be known by most of our jurors. They're the ones who are sitting there watching the television at night saying, I want to buy that product. They're the ones at night watching the news, especially probably lately, and at least in the last couple of years. Every time you flip a station, it's breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. How can we use breaking news into our cases? Pandemic is another word in the last couple of years that I've been seeing. Prior to 2020, I don't know about you, but I didn't even know what pandemic was. Pandemic, epidemic, I thought they were all the same thing. It's a thing of the past. It was some plague thing way back when that I don't have to worry about. Now you say pandemic, and it's like, holy shit. That comes with a whole lot of emotion. That brings in fear, uncertainty, and just panic, isolation. I mean, the feelings that come along with that actually translate very well for our cases. Some of them, our clients that have been forced to experience isolation or loneliness because of their injury. And, those are ways that you can get a juror to relate with those emotions. Whereas before, yeah, you're lonely. People are lonely. Life sucks. Now everybody sort of experienced that a bit. Depending on where you're at in the country, more than others. Essential is another word that is, just all over the television, which I, don't need to explain, but we all can tell the difference in what essential means now than what it did before. All these words that folks are listening to or using day to day leave imprints on their brain. And that's the expectation that they come with. So we just need to just watch it and figure it out. Ask the jury. Are there any focus groups? What's going on? Do you think, what does this word even mean to you? That's one thing to say, what word would you use? But then another way is, what does this word mean to you? Does everybody else agree with that? What's your take on this word? Run through 4 or 5 focus groups and you'll nail it down. I read a book way back when I thought I was going to try to do finance. Peter Lynch Beating the Street. And he said, keep your eyes open. The next greatest investment, stock investment, is right before your eyes. It's on the next corner. Watch all these shops that are popping up. This is, back in the 80s and 90s. But just keep your eyes open. It's right in front of you. You just got to listen. And the same goes for our power words. So how to find them? You got an easy resource that they're given to you. And then use your mind, be creative. And that's sort of fun. I mean, we're supposed to be wordsmiths, right? As lawyers, we're supposed to enjoy language and words. We don't know how to do any math other than take a third or 40%, but we can use words strategically to elicit or make a point. And I find great joy in it. And then how do we use them? I always keep this list of the prior power words right on my desk. It's a laminated copy. Doug Dykes gave it to me years ago. And we add to it every year. And that sits on my desk. So when I'm writing a demand or I'm writing a motion and writing an opening statement, I put all my words, I get it on the page, and then I go back through and I read. How can I make that point simpler? Is there a word that can convey this paragraph that I've got here? And if there is, I use it. And we can use that, like I said, in demands. We can use it in our arguments. The one that I find myself using all the time is bottom line. I mean, I go home and my fiance is like, if you use that one more time, I'll knock you over your head, because stop saying this is the bottom line. I don't need you to tell me this is the bottom line. I'm going to tell you what the bottom line is. But, you give the judge something right out the gate. Your bottom line is this. The simple truth is that. When we're meeting with our clients, I mean, I think the greatest thing that we can do as lawyers is hear our clients. And advocates is just to hear them, but to simply say back to them, I hear you. They want to be heard. And just the power of that statement and witness prep could change the entire dynamic. The examination of witnesses, the phrase I love, you and I both know. I mean, you can sit there and say, doctor, you and I both know that's not true. And you don't expect them to believe that either, do you? And now you've taken a point and you've polarized it. You've called to the limelight is bullshit. And you've created a tribe between you and the jury. And you can even follow it up. They got a right to judge your credibility. And you got, now you're thumping in right. We all have our rights, and we're going to hold on to those rights. We're not going to allow anybody to take them. I mean, it's just a simple word choice that can really empower the situation. And then there was a couple of things that I read in the blog yesterday that again, bringing back to the forefront the things that we've read or learned and forget to recall. And it's just the empowerment that we can do with certain words, like you decide. Simple decision or phrase of you decide. And the example that Mr. Keenan says is, ladies and gentlemen, the bottom line is you decide, not your neighbor, not your relatives, but on behalf of them and everyone else in this community, you decide the justice. I mean, that's such a powerful phrase. Justice by the people, Thomas Jefferson, to empower these folks, to let them know that they got a decision to make, and it's an important decision to make, and it's going to, forever make a mark in their lives as well as the other folks. And it was like, just a simple phrase. And the other one was believe in better. Ladies and gentlemen, you are entitled to, and it's your right to believe in better. You set the standards that you want in this community, and no one else can tell you otherwise. So now is your time, not only believe in better, but to make it better. And again, those are just simple ways to use power words to incite that action in the jury to render a verdict. And it might not go in your favor, but you're at least empowering them to do what they feel is right. And hopefully you've done your legwork before. Something else I brought to light when I was going back through all this stuff was find words that are aspirational, inclusive. And that doesn't mean you have to be woke, inclusive. I personally think that's going to backfire. But basics that we can all agree upon, the safety and security. Because generally most folks can agree that safety and security is of prime importance in their life. Or at least you would hope, at least in the majority of folks, and use that to, find your words. And then finally, one bonus thing that when I was thinking about words and how do we use words, is the power of silence. Silence can communicate just as much as a power word. And I remember sitting on the back deck of the tower, Mr. Keenan smoking his cigars, and there'd be times it would just be silent. You're waiting for him to say. And then he would, next thing out of his mouth would just be just like brilliance. And it was like, without that silence, the statement that he had would probably gloss over our head. It's the anticipation of what's next, what's coming. And, he tells the story of Anthony Hopkins the night before he wins his second Academy Award. And the reporter asks Anthony, when do you believe you met and conquered and embraced the art of acting? And he quickly responded back, when I knew how to be silent. That's sort of a double entendre, right? It was Silence of the Lambs, and we can all remember Hannibal Lecter and the silence that he would use throughout that movie to make an impact of the situation, to highlight the next thing that came out of his mouth. And, that also can, bring that same sort of effective communication that, we ultimately want to achieve. And then one other thing on silence, and I know we can all relate to this, was again, as a child, when you've done something wrong and you come inside, and instead of getting the belt or the hand, butt, your parents just simply stare at you and use the silence. I mean, that was awful. I mean, I guess that still applies in today's world. I'm bad. I come home and my fiance looks at me with just complete silence. I'm like, I'll get the belt for you. Just whoop me so you at least talk to me. We can do that in the courtroom too. And, as Mr. King says, we can send that message to the jury, to the witness, to the judge, if our disgust of something without raising our voice or using words. So don't forget the power of silence as well as the power of words. So I guess if you remember one thing from this quick presentation, remember that it's not what you say that matters. It's what the people hear. And it's not necessarily your language, it's how it's received that creates effective communication. And power words and silence are just a couple tools on that effective communication tool belt that will help you communicate your message. So hopefully that gives everybody a little bit of a refresher on power words and the importance of power words. But I would implore everybody to go back and read your blog articles and take the time to play with the words and talk to your focus groups about them, because it's fun.
It is. Thank you so much, Adam. It's interesting. I went to law school at this school called New England Law in Boston, and it's a small school. A lot of people don't know about it. Certainly nobody in the Pacific Northwest did after I graduated, but they have a wonderful faculty of world-class educators, lawyers, judges. And it's just this kind of small school that happens to have this access. And there was a woman there, Wendy Murphy, who is a child advocate, much like Papa Don is, and spent her life kind of more on the legislative side. She's was for many, many years on the news shows and things like that, advocating for children and especially for sexual violence. And she ran a program called Judicial Language Project, which I ran for her for a couple of years, maybe my 2L, 3L year. Since then, words have taken on entirely new meaning, because what our goal was during that project was to read court decisions, point out problematic language with respect to victims of sexual violence, and then write to the courts, either to the judge themselves or their clerk or whoever, and say, hey, maybe you would consider using a different word here because, panties is an over-sexualized term for underwear. And, sex is not the right word when it's rape or things like that. Use the right language. And I think, I've always been a word person. I've read my whole life, been obsessed with words, but that I now look at words, I read articles entirely differently. I think very carefully about, you could say somebody makes a claim, or you could make someone makes a valid point, or somebody makes a baseless claim. And all of those say the same thing, but they evoke a different emotion. And like you said in the beginning of all this, Adam, they frame the way you're going to see the next piece of information. Because if the author has inserted baseless or valid or whatever into the language, we're going to read the rest of it with those lenses, right?
Yeah, it's quite amazing. And I mean, case framing is such a big, important thing that we do. You can say, when we do it every day, you put the same set of facts in front of folks and they can come to two separate conclusions based upon the way you stage that information that they received. And to use that proper word and to know what word is going to evoke the correct response that you need is just, it's as powerful as it gets.
It is. And you want to, we always talk about focus grouping, but you don't want to assume that how a power word is going to impact somebody, right? I mean, the word pandemic, some people might be like, oh God, if I hear that word again, I'm jumping out the window. I can't take it anymore. They may respond negatively to it. Or somebody might have a positive response to something. We did an adversarial focus group this week on a case I'm going to trial in a couple of weeks. And we always talk about expert opinions because we know what expert opinions are. Opinions are, from an expert, a fact, essentially, or a piece of evidence, really. And one of the focus group members on the feedback form said, I really liked witness X because his opinions were based on facts instead of opinions, or his testimony was based on facts instead of opinions. And I was like, that is so opinions. That's so interesting. I had never thought about that. And, as folks who watch this go to colleges and things and learn how to interpret focus groups, you don't always take one person's preference, right, and insert it. But I thought that's actually a very, very good point. And so I did make some changes. Instead of asking about opinions, I asked about conclusions, because I'm like, worst case, the one person, because he was the one person who ended up being mostly on the defense side. I was like, worst case, someone who doesn't like the word opinion is convinced a little more. It's not going to harm anybody who already was fine with it. But I mean, that's just a recent concrete example of how a focus group really helped me reevaluate the words I was using in my actual trial case,
Yeah. So did you rerun it on the conclusion by using conclusion?
No, I haven't. I'm going to just go with it because at this point we've done tons of them. And I thought, that's a small change I can make that is not going to we had the rest of the group with us, so it wasn't going to turn them back the other way or anything like that. And so, and if the word opinion slips out, who cares? And just like Adam was saying, what?
It is. It's an opinion.
It is.
Based upon fact. Now, what facts did you consider?
Right. So it's, definitely interesting. And then another thing to think about, Adam, that you shared with us are all the different places you want to be thinking about using these words, in oral argument on your motions in limine, in oral argument on a substantive motion that plaintiff or that maybe defense brings or that you bring. You can pepper them throughout pleadings, just remember that words matter. And even though we don't really consistently think, well, I do, because I'm weird, but because I was trained to, I suppose, by Wendy Murphy, but we may not always consciously be aware of those words. They do bring about change and action, and, they can influence decisions. So, Adam, will you give us an example of a time you feel like the words made a difference? Like maybe you made a change to a word, or you changed something about something that you used in trial and it seemed to be impactful?
Well, I mean, just recently, it's not necessarily a trial story, but it's in dealing with a tough client. Sometimes you're shorting those really tough clients. And it's I represent a Jamaican woman here in the Panhandle of Florida, which could be difficult at times. And she is just tough, very tough, and doesn't want to even communicate with me. I'm like, God, geez, I'm here to help you. I mean, you hired her, for God's sakes. And I initially wanted to get frustrated. My insides are absolutely frustrated. It's like, what are we doing here? Take your case and go. But then I sort of just sat back and I took a breath and I said, I hear you. I hear you. And it was enough to let her guard down. I can see why you this. And I mean, and it just dropped her guard. And then I was able to step through and pull the information that we needed in order to get her ready for what she was going to do. So that is like the most impactful thing recently that I can think of that just made all the difference in the world.
That's a really, really good point. Just that nice communication to meet that person where she is, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly. I mean, that's all she needed to hear. When was the last time somebody probably told her, I hear you? She probably just used to getting just batted around, through life. Life has not dealt her the greatest, hand. And she's probably never felt heard, or at least in that sense before. And, just simply communicating that to her, using the power of those 3 words made all the difference.
Mm-hmm. And thinking about what the words mean that you're using based on the context and where they're coming from is interesting too. Because I feel like sometimes you'll have a conversation. This happens sometimes with me, where I have a conversation with somebody and I'm like, are you not understanding like what's coming out of my mouth? I'm saying this and your responses are not making any sense to me. And, it can be an aggravating and frustrating experience. But if you're able to think back and think, okay, listen, we all experience words differently. We all understand language differently. And my husband's a software engineer. So if I say something in a way that I think makes sense, he sometimes is like, what are you even asking me about? Right. So there is an underlying need to kind of understand the context and the goal of that communication too. And there's just no better way of doing that in a litigation scenario than focus groups.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Dennis Phillips asks, what are the 22 power words for 2022? Wow, it's a lot of twos. What are the 22 power words for 2022? Dennis, they are not out yet. So Don sent me an email a couple days ago and said they haven't been finalized. So eventually it would most likely either the subject of a blog or through, I think it's usually blogs, right, Adam, that he sends them in?
Well, in the past, like I said, when we were doing the end of the year seminars, it would always be Mr. Keenan would present them, as part of the end of the yearly seminar, and then release it in January as part of the blog. So again, hint, hint, Mr. Keenan, get us back on to Costa Rica. So hopefully, it'll come through the blog here shortly though. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a lot of that will have, I'm sure, my guess, I guess I shouldn't say I'm sure, but my guess is that a lot of it will have been impacted by the pandemic and what we've been going through the past couple of years. I think language and experiences and the context and lenses through which we see the world and experience things has changed. And, for better or for worse, it's kind of been a similar experience across the board on some very basic levels. So, which gives us a good jumping off point for different words that now may take on a different meaning for everybody.
Exactly. Yep.
All right. So let's see if I don't think we have any other questions from the audience. One thing I wanted to point out is when Adam was talking about the power of silence is we can use a lot of words and we can fill a lot of time, but people have a certain bandwidth and a certain, point at which they're no longer hearing the words you're saying. And so it's not all about using every single power word or shoving in as many as you possibly can. It really should be quality over quantity. And, Ed has a lot of, the opening statement course, the advanced opening statement course, the closing argument courses and stuff talk about really not going overboard and giving 1 or 2 hour closing arguments or, 45-minute opening statements for that reason alone. And part of that is words. We can only, take in so many words. So use words intentionally, use the powerful words, intentionally, and use silence so that you're communicating in an effective way and not just a word vomit way, right?
Yeah, I mean, and take that into consideration of how we get our information today. Mm-hmm. I mean, even my 80-year-old grandmother will sit there on her iPhone and skim captions, looking at words, catching a word or phrase and developing her entire opinion about something in a split second. Mm-hmm. And so, how did you come to that? Well, look at this. So the way we take in information is by snippets now, and our mind has been trained to look at snippets and and just go with that real reaction that we've got from a word, the emotional response. So now more than ever, words, symbols, can sort of truncate and make your argument in a quick, succinct manner that effectively communicates to your listener. And I mean, you got to be mindful of that too.
Absolutely. And imagine being a juror sitting through possibly weeks of testimony. I mean, are they going to remember every word that's said? No. And if you've ever watched the deliberations after an adversarial focus group or any type of focus group, you know that they get bits and pieces of it, and then they fill in the rest with their life experience, which again goes back to the voir dire. Make sure you've got that down, because you want to make sure that people have the correct life experience to fill in those gaps in a way that benefits your client. But it's got to be about the important points. And there are some words that we're going to use because we have to convince the judge, right? Even during trial, even when it's a jury trial, there are some words like, is your opinion on a more probable than not basis that the jury doesn't care about, but you may have to put it in. So there is that.
Absolutely. 2 audiences.
Yeah.
3 audiences. Don't forget the appellate board.
That's true. Always make sure you're writing for everybody whose, eyes are going to be looking at your documents or hearing your arguments or reviewing your transcripts. So quality over quantity for sure. Use your power words. Find out who your audience is. With judges, you can do that by doing deep dives into their backgrounds, where they came from, what kind of law they used to practice. You sometimes can find information about different charities they're involved in and whatnot. And, especially if you're in a bench trial, if maybe you have a Federal Tort Claims Act or something like that, or if you're like me and Young G and have an issue that causes you to have a bench trial, you can still be extremely effective and really win their hearts over when you communicate effectively. We have a question from Justin Starin. I somehow missed the 2021 power words. Where do I go find them? Actually, that's a good question, because were there 2021 power words?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I believe that there were. I would go back and check the blog because I believe that there were, but right here on my list is the last one was 2020. So your guess is as good as mine. But if they were released, it's going to be in the blog, or it's going to be in the Edge series.
Okay. Yeah. And also sometimes I find that if I miss it in a blog or whatever, if I'm at a college or something, one of the faculty will know about it and get it to us that way. So, all right. If there's no further audience questions, then, this is one of those topics that is super important, but really doesn't need to be beat to death, right? Because then we're becoming hypocrites and using words when we don't need to use them. So, yeah. So if anybody has any last minute questions, let us know. You can always, as I always say, we're going to put Adam's contact information in the description below. So if you have questions for him, you're welcome to reach out. If you're in a certain jurisdiction that you're worried you won't be able to use certain words or phrases, that's something we hear a lot of. I won't be able to use that in my jurisdiction or whatever. The thesaurus is a good place to find other words that are similar, and then test those out with your focus groups. And then also just always a reminder that should underscore everything you do in your practice is being authentic. And Adam talked about being authentic and use words. If you would never say the word New York Minute, either practice it until it gets super, it gets to be secondhand and it sounds like you've used it a million times, or don't worry about it. Find a different way to say something that means quick in a way that's authentic to you and comes across as believable and legitimate. All right. Thank you so much, Adam, for being here today and talking to us about power words. And thank you to all of you who joined us this week for our episode of Fridays with Keenan's Cutting Edge. Remember, words matter. So pay attention to the words you hear and see on a daily basis and how they impact your opinions, emotions, and actions. If you like today's video, please click that thumbs up to feed the YouTube algorithm. And don't forget to subscribe and sign up for alerts so you don't miss an episode. Next week, we have Michael Pandiser with us. Michael is going to share with us about Pat Maloney's closing argument in a case called Flores. I love getting inspiration from hearing examples of powerful closing arguments. So I look forward to hearing from Michael next week with all of you. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next time.